I want you to close your eyes for a second. Imagine you've just walked into a massive, dimly lit archives.
Okay.
It's quiet. Maybe you hear the hum of a ventilation system, but mostly just silence. And you can smell that very specific scent-old paper, drying glue, a bit of dust.
Oh, yeah. It's the historian's natural habitat. There's nothing quite like that feeling of the past in your hand.
Exactly. Now, usually when we picture a historian here, we imagine them reading these letters to find out what happened.
Right. Who betrayed whom? What was the price of wheat in 1520?
Did the king actually say that witty line before the battle? We're looking for facts, for events.
We're detectives, basically. We're trying to reconstruct a crime scene.
But what if there's a completely different way to read them? What if, instead of just looking for the events, you could read them to uncover, I don't know, the hidden architecture of the writer's mind?
Ah, okay.
That's what we're digging into today. We're exploring a method called Qualitative Content Analysis, or QCA,
Sure.
and we're going to see how it creates this massive clash between different ways of understanding history.
It's a fascinating shift, really, because QCA, at its simplest, moves beyond just reading a document for information. It's about systematically analyzing how a document is written.
To find patterns.
Patterns the writer might not even know they were creating.
So it's not just a new tool in the belt, is it? It sounds more like a philosophical argument.
It is. We're really talking about a battle between digging up the truth and analyzing the narrative.
And that's the core tension we're exploring.
Exactly. And to get that tension, we have to understand the mechanics first, because this isn't just thinking deeply about a text. It's a rigorous, almost scientific process.
Yeah, let's unpack that toolkit. Because when I first looked at this, it honestly sounded a bit like taking a beautiful, emotional romance novel and just turning it into a cold, hard spreadsheet. Is that fair?
In a way, yes. And, some historians hate it for exactly that reason. Traditional history often focuses on the flow, right? The narrative, A happened, then B happened. QCA stops that flow. It breaks the text down into data. It asks, which concepts appear most often? Which themes are, surprisingly absent?
Or which ideas are being suppressed?
Precisely.
Okay, let's make this concrete. Let's try a little live lat here so you can actually hear how this works. Let's say we have a letter from a soldier in World War I writing home to his wife.
Okay, classic historical source.
And he writes, "The mud is our only enemy now. It swallows everything." A traditional historian quotes that to show the conditions in the trenches were bad. Simple.
Right. They use the quote to prove a fact about the physical reality. Case closed.
But if I'm doing QCA, I have to code this.
Yeah.
So how does that happen?
Well, you have a coding scheme you develop beforehand. You might look at the word mud. Do you code that under, say, weather conditions?
I guess so.
Or do you code it under personification of nature? Notice he calls it an enemy.
He's giving the mud agency.
Exactly. Now, if you analyze 500 of these letters and you find that 80% of soldiers refer to the earth itself as an enemy,
You've found a pattern.
you found a collective psychological shift where the very land has become hostile.
And that's the hidden architecture you mentioned. You're not looking for the depth of the mud. You're looking for the structure of your fear.
Precisely. And the key word here is transparency. In traditional history, there's often this trust me, I'm an expert vibe.
Right. The historian reads 10,000 pages, gets a feel for the era, and writes a book.
Yeah.
You just have to trust their intuition.
Which is great if they're a genius, but
Bad if they're biased.
yes. QCA forces you to show your work. You have to define your codes. You have to say, every time I see the word king, I am coding it as authority figure. It builds a bridge between subjective interpretation and a rigorous, visible methodology.
It makes the whole process traceable.
And it also sounds like the only way to handle what we'd now call big data. If you have a corpus, that's the fancy word.
That's
right?
the one, your collection of texts.
If you have a corpus of thousands of diplomatic cables, no single human brain can hold all of that information at once.
Not a chance.
That's where it becomes a superpower. You can track how a concept like freedom or honor changes over 50 years, across thousands of documents. You can see systematic patterns, peaks and valleys in the data that you would absolutely miss just reading page by page.
But every superpower has its kryptonite. I mean, this method sounds rigorous, but isn't it also dangerous? You're literally chopping history into tiny little boxes.
You are, and the biggest trap is anachronism. This is where the method can really, really stumble.
Anachronism, that's like leaving a Starbucks cup in a scene from Game of Thrones.
Or a digital watch on a Roman centurion. In QCA, the risk comes from the codes that you create. You are a modern person. Your brain is full of modern concepts.
So if I create a code called gender equality,
and you go looking for it in 9th century texts, you're going to distort reality.
because the concept didn't even exist then.
It didn't exist.
Yeah.
If you force that modern grid onto the past, you're just overshadowing the historical context. You're reducing the complex alien mindset of the past into boxes that only make sense to us today.
It's like trying to translate poetry using Google Translate. You get the words, but you completely lose the soul.
That's the risk of fragmentation. It's another huge problem. To code a text, you often have to chop it up. Sentences, paragraphs, key terms. But historical texts, like a great political speech or a sermon, rely on their flow, their rhetoric.
The argument builds.
Yes. And when you chop it up to put in your spreadsheet, you kill the vibes. You lose the meaning that comes from the structure of the argument itself.
And there's one more trap I want to highlight. The quantitative illusion. Just because you can count it doesn't mean it counts, right?
Oh, this is a huge one. We tend to think that frequency equals importance. If a word appears 100 times, it must be the main point.
But it might not be.
Sometimes the most important thing is what isn't being said. Or a concept is so powerful, so sacred, that people just avoid writing it down directly.
Like a taboo. Or something everyone just knows so they don't bother saying it.
Exactly. Counting isn't the same as understanding. So we have this powerful, slightly dangerous tool. Now let's see how it picks a fight with the old guard of history.
Let's get into the drama. The clash of paradigms. If we go back to the 19th century, we have Leopold von Ranke. He's kind of the godfather of modern history, isn't he?
He is. His famous motto was that history should show how it actually happened.
Wie es eigentlich gewesen.
Exactly. Ranke and the Positivists believed the past is objective. It's just sitting there in the documents waiting to be found. The historian is just a neutral observer, carefully dusting off the facts.
Okay, so if I walk into Ranke's office with my QCA toolkit, my highlighters, and my coding scheme, he is probably not impressed.
He's horrified. To a positivist, QCA looks like tampering with the evidence. You aren't just reading, you're intervening, you're cutting the text up, categorizing it, imposing your own framework on it.
So the Ranke historian says, let the document speak for itself.
And the QCA analyst says, no, I need to organize what the document is saying into a specific data structure to understand it.
It creates a massive friction.
A huge one. It challenges the whole idea of the raw, pure document. For the positivist, the text is a clear window to the past. For the QCA analyst, the text is a construction site that needs to be inspected.
Okay, so Ranke hates us. But surely there are other schools of history where this fits better. Let's move to the French. The Annales school.
Ah, now this is a much better fit. A really harmonious marriage, actually. The Annales historians think mid-20th century, they stopped caring about kings and battles and specific events.
They were interested in the longue durée, the long term.
Right. They wanted to understand mentalities.
Mentalities.
So,
The collective psychology of a time.
exactly. Not what did the king decide on Tuesday, but how did people in the 17th century understand the concept of death?
And QCA seems perfect for that. Because you're not looking for one guy's opinion on death.
No, you're looking for a pattern across thousands of people. Imagine a study of thousands of last will and testaments from 1650 to 1750. You aren't reading them to see who got the farm.
You're coding the opening prayers.
Yes, that's a great example. You might track specific religious phrases.
So you might see a shift.
You might see that in 1650, the wills are full of the fear of judgment and sin. By 1750, maybe those codes drop away, and you see more codes related to family affection or memory.
You can quantitatively prove a shift in the collective soul of a society.
That's the power of it. You're mapping the drift of culture itself.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate again. What about the Marxists? They care about big structures too, but they're obsessed with the economy.
This is what I'd call a complicated friendship. Marxist history is built on the idea that material conditions, money, factories, food production drive history.
Right, the economic base.
And the text, the laws, the art, the religion is just the superstructure, a reflection of that economic base.
So where does QCA fit in?
It's great for analyzing that superstructure, the ideology. For example, you could use QCA to analyze the rules of conduct posters on factory walls in the 1850s.
Okay, so I'm coding these posters. I see words like punctuality, sobriety, obedience.
And QCA helps you see how the factory owners were trying to construct a new type of human, the obedient worker. You can map the discourse of control.
Okay.
And here's the big Marxist warning. If you only look at the text, you miss the reality.
You see the rule about punctuality, But you don't see the starvation wages that forced the worker to be there in the first place.
Precisely. If you treat the text as the whole reality, you're ignoring the material suffering. So for a Marxist, QCA is a useful tool, but it has to be anchored in economic facts. You can't just float around in the words.
Which brings us to the people who love floating around in the words. Post-Structuralism.
This is the sweet spot.
This seems like the home turf for QCA.
Absolutely. Think of scholars like Michel Foucault. The core idea here is that reality is constructed through language and power. The text isn't just a description of reality. The text is the reality we live in.
Okay, that sounds a bit abstract. Let's ground it. The outline mentions colonial history.
It's a perfect example. Imagine you're analyzing reports from British colonial officers in India in the 19th century. A traditional historian reads them to find out how the colony was being run.
But a post-structuralist using QCA asks a totally different question.
They aren't looking for the truth of India. They know the report is biased. Instead, they are analyzing how the colonizers built the narrative of the civilizing mission.
So you'd code for things like describing the locals as childlike or chaotic.
And describing the British as rational or orderly.
You're analyzing the construction of the lie.
Yes, you're showing how language was used to justify power. Or take the Cold War. You could analyze American high school textbooks from the 1950s. You weren't checking if the world was actually free. You're coding how the concept of the free world was built, repeated, and sold to teenagers.
That makes QCA the ultimate weapon for deconstruction. You're taking apart the engine to see how the propaganda works.
And that leads us to our final philosophical stop, hermeneutics and postmodernism.
Hermeneutics is just the fancy word for interpretation.
Right. And postmodernism is the idea that there is no single objective truth, which feels like it might clash with a method that uses codes and counting.
It seems like a paradox.
It is. If a researcher says, my QCA proves this is the absolute truth of what happened, a postmodernist will laugh them out of the room. They don't believe in absolute truth.
But if the researcher says, here is a pattern I found in the narrative,
then they're friends, exactly. If you admit that you are just analyzing one story, one representation, then QCA is a perfectly valid tool. It aligns with the idea that all we have are stories. We don't have the past. We only have the texts the past left behind.
So we've toured this whole museum of historical philosophy. We've seen where QCA fits and where it fights. If you had to summarize this big shift from everyone listening, the real aha moment, what is it?
The headline is an epistemological pivot, which I know is a mouthful.
A little bit, yeah.
But it just means a shift in how we know what we know. QCA moves the historian away from being an observer discovering the past and turns them into an interpreter analyzing representations.
So we stop writing the history of events, and we start writing the history of how events were talked about.
We analyze the construction, not just the raw data. We are looking at the lens, not just through it.
Okay. Before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with a thought experiment. We've been talking about 17th century wills and colonial reports, but let's bring this right here, right now.
To the digital age.
Yes. Imagine a historian 500 years from now. They walk into a digital archive. Maybe it's a server farm on the moon. Who knows? They access the corpus of your life, your emails, your Slack messages, your Instagram captions, and they apply qualitative content analysis.
That is a terrifying thought.
Think about the codes they would create. They wouldn't just read your LOLs. They'd code them.
They'd realize that LOL almost never means laughing out loud.
No.
They'd code it as like social friction reducer or awkward acknowledgement.
Exactly. They would map the hidden architecture of our anxiety. They'd see the gap between the life we post about and the life we actually live.
They wouldn't see the truth of our Sunday morning. They'd see the narrative of the perfect brunch that we constructed.
And that is exactly what makes history so interesting. It's not just about what happened.
It's about the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of what happened.
Something to think about the next time you draft a text message. You're creating the source material for the future. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the patterns beneath the text.
Stay curious.
See you next time.